Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Reed, and I am so glad that you're here today. And I'd like to start by sharing a very short history of Labor Day. Seems appropriate. Labor Day is an annual celebration of workers and their achievements, originating during one of American labor history's most dismal chapters. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, the average American worker worked 12-hour days and 7-day weeks in order to eke out a basic living. Despite restrictions in some states, children as young as 5 or 6 toiled in mills, factories, and mines across the country, earning a fraction of the adults' wages. People of all ages, particularly the very poor and recent immigrants, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, and breaks. As manufacturing increasingly supplanted agriculture as the wellspring of American employment, labor unions, which had first appeared in the late 18th century, grew more prominent and vocal. They began organizing strikes and rallies to protest poor conditions and compel employers to renegotiate hours and pay. Some of these events turned violent during this period, including the infamous Haymarket Riot of 1886. Others gave rise to long-standing traditions. On September 5th, 1882, 10,000 workers took unpaid time off to march from City Hall to Union Square in New York City, holding the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history. The idea of a working men's holiday, celebrated on the first Monday in September, caught on in other industrial centers across the country, and many states passed legislation recognizing it. Congress would not legalize the holiday until 12 years later, when a watershed moment in American labor history brought workers' rights squarely into the public view. On May 11, 1894, employees of the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago went on strike to protest wage cuts and firing of union representatives. On June 26, the American Railroad Union, led by Eugene V. Debs, called for a boycott of all Pullman railway cars, crippling railroad traffic nationwide. To break the Pullman strike, the federal government dispatched troops to Chicago, unleashing a wave of riots that resulted in the deaths of more than a dozen workers. In the wake of this massive unrest and in an attempt to repair ties with American workers, Congress passed an act making Labor Day a legal holiday in the District of Columbia and the territories. On June 28, 1894, President Grover Cleveland signed it into law, and more than a century later, the true founder of Labor Day has yet to be identified. So now we have a bit of context about the holiday we're celebrating this weekend. Let us pray. Father, Mother God, we are grateful to be living in a place and time with so many possibilities. We are grateful for your constant and loving presence in our lives. We ask now that our guides, angels, and loved ones in spirit gather close around us, and we celebrate that by repeating the prayer that our brother Jesus taught us. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Oh, once again, thank you all for being here. We'll start with some music to celebrate the working day. So, a couple of years ago, I discovered this wonderful book titled Compassionomics by Stephen. I knew I was going to mess this up, and I practiced it a couple times. Trzekiak, I believe. and Anthony Mazzelli. It was inspiring enough. I'd love to share some of what I learned from it today. So I'll leave it up here if anybody wants to take a look at it. For most of his career, Dr. Stephen Trzakiak was not a big believer in the touchy-feely side of medicine. As a specialist in intensive care and chief of medicine at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, New Jersey, Trzakiak felt most at home in the hard sciences. Then his new boss, Dr. Anthony Mazzarelli, came to him with a problem. Recent studies had shown an epidemic of burnout among healthcare providers. As co-president of Cooper, Mazzarelli was in charge of a major medical system and needed to find ways to improve patient care. He had a mission for Trzakiak. He wanted him to find answers to this question: can treating patients with medicine and compassion make a measurable difference in the well-being of both patients and doctors? Trzakiak wasn't convinced. Sure, compassion's good, he thought, but he expected to review the existing science and report back the bad news that caring has no quantitative rationale. But Mazzarelli was his colleague and chief, so he dove in. After considering more than 1,000 scientific abstracts and 250 research papers, Trzakiak and Mazzarelli were surprised to find that the answer was resoundingly yes. When healthcare providers take the time to make human connections that help end suffering, patient outcomes improve and medical costs decrease. Among other benefits, compassion reduces pain, improves healing, lowers blood pressure, and helps alleviate depression and anxiety. In their book, Compassionomics, the revolutionary scientific evidence that caring makes a difference, Trzakiak and Mazzarelli lay out research showing the benefits of compassion and how it can be learned. One study they cite shows that when patients received a message of empathy, kindness, and support that lasted just 40 seconds, their anxiety was measurably reduced. In the book, these doctors state, the picture typically painted of the early man is one of the rugged, self-sufficient hunter-gatherers, a mighty warrior whose equally rugged partner is tending the hearth back at the cave, training their offspring how to survive alone if necessary in the harsh environment. This fits the notion of Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest evolutionary theory, where it's imagined the strongest and toughest are pitted against each other so they can pass on their robust, superior genetic material to the next generation. Then, as the story goes, as humans became more civilized, they looked up to the heavens and down to their tools, and human reason took over. They began to develop a moral compass that led them to feel empathy for each other and treat each other with compassion. Ultimately, this theory evolved into the modern-day concepts of morality. That's the narrative that everyone is used to hearing. However, it's not quite how it actually happened. Darwin did not originate the phrase survival of the fittest. It was actually Herbert Spencer, a British biologist and anthropologist, who coined the phrase after reading Darwin's view on evolution. What Darwin actually concluded was different and even more remarkable. According to Darwin, the communities with the greatest compassion for others would flourish the best and rear the greatest number of offspring. In short, the body of scientific evidence support that compassion actually protects the species. I love this story. Years ago, anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first signs of civilization in a culture. The student expected Mead to talk about fishhooks or clay pots or grinding stones. But no. Mead said that the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur or thigh bone that had been broken and then healed. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, get to the river for a drink, or hunt for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur that has healed is evidence that someone has taken time to stay with the one who fell, has bound up the wound, has carried the person to safety, and has tended the person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts, Mead said. At a very basic level, research supports that compassion is something intrinsic to the human condition. Remember that. Compassion is intrinsic to the human condition. For example, studies show that infants will resonate with the cries of others in distress, and that toddlers are naturally inclined to altruistically help others. There's a general consensus among scientists that compassion for others is evolutionary. Furthermore, compassion is integral to the belief system of almost all world religions and has been a fundamental moral imperative in essentially all cultures and civilizations throughout history. For example, from the Bible we read in Mark 6:34, when Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He began to teach them many things. And in 1 John 3:17, but whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Well, what is compassion exactly? Page 35. Compassion is defined as the emotional response to another's pain or suffering, involving an authentic desire to help. This differs from empathy, which is the feeling and understanding component, detecting and mirroring another's emotions and experiencing their feeling. Because compassion also includes taking action. Feeling empathy is a necessary prerequisite to motivate acts of compassion, so the terms are related, but they are distinct. There are actually neuroscience underpinnings for this distinction in terminology. When people are studied with brain imaging tests called a functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, which can detect subtle differences in cerebral blood flow, there is higher activity in areas of the brain that are firing at any given moment. When a person experiences empathy, the feeling component, the pain centers in the brain light up. That person is experiencing another's pain. But when a person is focused on compassion, the action component of trying to alleviate another's suffering, a distinctly different area of the brain lights up. It's the reward path associated with affiliation and positive emotion that's affected. I like that, the reward path that's affected when you feel compassion. So neuroscience supports what's borne out through our own experiences encountering another's pain. Compassion, or a lack thereof, can have a powerful effect on human beings. Not just the receiver of compassion, but the giver as well. Evolutionary science supports that compassion has benefited humankind collectively, but is it also possible that compassion has a meaningful and measurable effect on people individually? If so, can that be examined through science? That scientific data already exists in studies that have been done in medical science. Healthcare is an optimal laboratory to test the effects of compassion at the individual personal level. And it turns out that researchers in medicine have already been studying this for decades. Through more than 200 published medical studies that speak straight to the science of compassion. When those studies are considered together, what you find is quite remarkable. This emerging field of science is called compassionomics, which is the scientific evidence that caring makes a difference. People in healthcare have always understood that treating patients with compassion is the right thing to do as a moral imperative. However, few healthcare providers realize the extent to which compassion matters. They do not realize how powerful their compassion can actually be, and science shows it's a game changer. To shift our attention briefly for a moment, we've all noticed that the political divide in America is growing. Anybody notice that recently? As this gap widens, people are becoming less and less comfortable with those who hold views other than their own. According to data from The Atlantic, there has been a steady increase of both Republicans and Democrats who would be upset if their child married someone of the other political party. In 1960, it was essentially a non-issue among parents, with about 5% from each party that would be displeased if their son or daughter married someone from the other party. Today, about 40% of parents would have a negative reaction about inter-party marriage. And this was printed maybe 10 years ago, so I'm thinking that 40% is probably higher these days. This unwillingness to look outward from one's own bubble to those that have a differing view is ironically one of the few things that members of both political parties share. By remaining in a bubble, it's like everyone is becoming unable to see another one's humanity. There's no way to show compassion if one cannot see the other's humanity. A recent survey study found that half of Americans believe our society in general is not compassionate and does not place a high value on compassion for others. The preponderance of data indicates that people are becoming significantly more self-focused. Our disposition is shifting away from compassion for others, and this shift appears to be accelerating over time. While there were studies of college students, do not be too quick to dismiss this data as simply the selfishness of youth. In fact, it turns out that adults may be the ones actually at fault here. In a recent study from Harvard University, researchers surveyed 10,000 US middle and high school students from 33 different schools and asked them what they believed their parents valued most. They found that nearly 2/3 of our youth feel their parents do not value caring for others as much as they value achievements and accolades. While parents may deny that they explicitly say this to their children, this study offers solid evidence of a generation that has internalized this message from older Americans. 2/3 of our students feel that adults don't value compassion for others. We may feel this is a recent trend. I'd like to share a study from 1973. Princeton University psychologists John Darling and Daniel Baston conducted a classic experiment at Princeton Theological Seminary. They randomly assigned the seminarians to either an intervention group, in which they received a talk on the biblical parable of the Good Samaritan, or a control group that received a talk on an unrelated non-helping topic. Immediately afterward, the students were instructed to walk to another building for their next assignment. On their walk, they encountered a stranger in need, disheveled, lying on the side of the road between two buildings, moaning and obviously in distress. The man slumped over on the ground was an actor who was part of the experiment. What Darling and Batson learned from their experiment was truly striking in 3 ways. The first was the overall rate of a compassionate response, regardless of the group of the study to which the seminarians were randomized. Overall, only 40% of the seminarians stopped to help the man in distress. Keep in mind that the other 60% who did not stop to help were also studying to be pastors of a church. The second striking fact was that the seminarians randomly assigned to hear the message about the Good Samaritan were no more likely to stop to help. The message did not matter. The third striking finding was what they found to be the major determinant of compassionate helping was that the seminarians did not feel they had time to offer help. Not surprisingly, perhaps, that is also the main reason that doctors or healthcare professionals also give for not displaying more compassion for their patients. However, in one of the major studies trying to measure the effect of compassion on medical outcomes, this is what was tried by the oncologists participating. One group of oncologists delivered this message to their patients at the beginning of the examination. I know this is a tough experience to go through, and I want you to know that I am here with you. Some of the things that I say to you today may be difficult to understand, so I want you to feel comfortable in stopping me if something I say is confusing or doesn't make sense. We are here together, and we will go through this together. And then at the end of the consultation, the oncologist said, I know this is a tough time for you, and I want to emphasize again that we are in this together. I will be with you each step along the way. These messages took just 40 seconds to deliver. Patients that heard these messages from the oncologist rated the doctor as warmer and more caring, as well as sensitive and compassionate. They also rated the oncologist higher in terms of wanting what was best for the patient. But what was most striking was that using a validated scientific scale to precisely measure patients' level of anxiety, these patients had measurably lower anxiety. 40 seconds was all it took to make a meaningful difference to the patient. But compassion doesn't just benefit the recipients. Trzekiak and Mazzarelli learned. Researchers at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania found that when people spent time doing good for others, by writing an encouraging note to a gravely ill child, it actually changed their perception of time to make them feel they had more of it. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? The evidence shows that when you invest time in other people, you actually feel you have more time or that you're not in so much of a hurry. The same study that found doctors who originally felt they didn't have time for empathy and were then given a bit of training in the neuroscience of empathy generally changed their interactions with patients in ways that patients rated more empathic. Compassion also seems to prevent doctor burnout, a condition that affects almost half of US physicians. Medical schools often warn students not to get too close to patients because too much exposure to human suffering is likely to lead to exhaustion. But the opposite appears to be true. Evidence shows that connecting with patients makes physicians happier and more fulfilled. We've always heard that burnout crushes compassion. It's probably more likely that those people with low compassion, those are the ones who are predisposed to burnout, Trzekiak said. That human connection, and specifically a compassionate connection, can actually build resilience and resistance to burnout. Trzekiak and Mazzarelli hope their evidence-based arguments will spur medical schools to make compassion a part of the curriculum. For those outside the healthcare system, acting with compassion can be a kind of therapy as well, the authors say. They cite the phenomenon of the helper's high, the good feeling that comes from helping others, and explain how giving to others benefits the giver's brain and nervous systems. I can say this with confidence, Trzekiak says, other-focused behavior is beneficial to your own medical health. For Trzekiak, the research has a personal effect. When he started into the project, he'd been going through his own existential crisis, triggered by his son's middle school homework assignment that asked, "What is the most pressing problem of our time?" While he believed his work to that point was meaningful, it was definitely not the most pressing problem of our time. Imagine being asked in middle school, what is the most pressing problem of our time? I wish I could have heard those answers. Middle schoolers are so creative and honest. Along the way, he says he realized he was feeling burned out after 20 years of practicing medicine. So armed with data from his book, he decided to test his own hypothesis. The recommended prescription is what I call escapism. Get away, detach, pull back, go on some nature hikes or whatever, but I was not believing it, Trzekiak explained in a TED talk. Instead, he says, he applied the techniques he'd been studying, including spending at least 40 seconds expressing compassion to patients. I connected more, not less, cared more, not less, leaned in rather than pulled back. And that was when the fog of burnout began to lift. He prescribes the same for anyone, not just healthcare providers, suffering from mental or emotional exhaustion. Look around you and see those in need of compassion and give your 40 seconds of compassion, he said. See how it transforms your experience. So I leave that challenge in your hands and let you decide what you want to do with it. It's fine for meditation. Thank you, Ken. Luana, can you reach behind me? I just have to worry about it in a minute. So as we join together to learn and grow and heal, we prepare ourselves by getting comfortable in our seats, closing our eyes, knowing we are protected and all is well. Our bodies relax into the seats as we take 3 deep, relaxing breaths, focusing on just letting go of whatever tension we may be feeling. Just feel your breath as it goes in, out. And as you exhale, feel yourself relaxing more and more, and allowing the seat to support you. We're in a protected space right now, surrounded by all that is loving, good, and into this safe and loving space. You're invited to just relax and open your heart, open your mind. Just breathe and imagine your heart space expanding. And as it does, we're going to invite one of your guides into the safe and loving space with you. You may see or feel their loving light presence coming closer. You may hear their approach. You may just feel their presence. And just continue to breathe and invite them closer, knowing that even if you can't see them or hear them, they are assuredly there because you've asked them to. Just continue to breathe as your guides draw closer and closer. And today, we're going to take a minute or two to ask your guides where you should think about being more compassionate with yourself. You already know the opportunities in your life to be compassionate with others. But right now, it's time to be compassionate with you. And your guide can help you find where you might be lacking in this. So take one more deep breath. Listen or feel or sense closely for the answer. It's time to turn your attention to here and now. Take a deep breath and release it. As you feel your attention returning to your body. Another deep breath. Wiggle your fingers and toes if that helps, and open your eyes whenever you're ready. Welcome home.